struggle was not red. I experienced it, being deprived, being oppressed, even confused. It's enough now, we're taking the power back. We're stronger than before, we're prouder, too strong. The worst is over, from Cape to Cairo.
Good afternoon and welcome back to the AZAPO online political education series, and apologies for the late start. We had technological problems as we began the conversation, but we are here now and we are good to go. Cde Nkokeng, you are now live and talk to us.
Yeah, good afternoon, colleagues, and my sincere apologies for the disturbances in technology. We tested this morning, everything looks okay, but then, Murphy's Law is part of our life. Comrade Simpiwe, thank you very much for this opportunity. Asking me to share my views with regard to the topic, the role of trade unions in the current political situation. It's a very robust topic. It's very involved, taking into consideration what is taking place in the country today. My approach to the discussion, I just want to kick off by giving a very short history about where we're coming from in terms of trade unionism. It's not my intention really to give an exhaustive account, but I'll just highlight some of the things that I really think are important for this discussion. I will not take you back to the French Revolution. I think in my introduction, which I did not hear, you did mention my first influence in Black consciousness philosophy. Now, the background, I really just want to start it at the time when the Black consciousness was started, which we all know that it started at tertiary institutions. And by that time, I was still a high school student. And the influence of the Black consciousness made me to be politically aware. Now, as we know, the Black consciousness movement was started by students, but they realized that before they are students, they are members of the community. So after the formation of the student organization, which we all knew as South African Student Organization, SASO, they wanted to infiltrate to the communities where they are coming from. Because before we are students, we are members of the community. Now, after the successful launch of SASO, the student find it necessary to influence other sectors of the community. And on that basis, we saw the emergence or the formation of BPC, the Black People's Convention. But that was not enough because they realized that there are other sectors of the communities that they needed to infiltrate in terms of conscientizing, organizing, and educating the oppressed people in terms of the philosophy of Black consciousness. And part of that program also included the trade unions. And that's where we saw the Black consciousness adherents getting into the labor market to influence the workers, because at that point in time, the fight was for the total national liberation of Black people. We know that prior to the formation of the Black consciousness movement, the Black workers really didn't have any rights. In fact, they were not even regarded as workers because they were not even allowed to participate or in workers' rights, or even form what would be a trade union or an association or any form of organizing themselves together. We know of the Industrial Conciliation Act, which excluded Black people. It only catered for white people. And it was on the basis of that Black consciousness movement felt that workers need to be organized in such a manner that they must participate in the national liberation of our country. Now, I'm not going to mention all the trade unions that we started then in the Black consciousness movement, but subsequent to that, there were few BC formations that were created or organized within the labor movement. And we know of the BIFAU, we know of the BAMKU, we know of the South African Black Workers Association, we know of the Black Workers, Black Allied Workers Union, which in terms of the struggle, it's one union which led to the 1973 strike in Durban. I think if my memory serves me very well, it was Comrade Drake's Koka, who played a very pivotal role in terms of organizing the workers around the Durban area. Now, we must also mention that the intention of the Black consciousness movement in terms of the organizing of workers, we were looking for a federation that will be independent from any political influence, so that the workers, when they are being organized, they are not necessarily organized within a specific political party, but they are being conscientized in terms of fighting for their own workers' rights, which ultimately must lead to the total liberation of Black people in our country. To that effect, we had NACTU, which was formed, I think, in 1986. But prior to that, COSATU came into the picture, and it was launched in 1986 in Durban, which was a federation that aligned to a specific political orientation, which was ANC at that point in time, and still is even at this current moment. We had KUSA and AZAPO. AZAPO was the Azanian Congress of Trade Unions. It then merged with KUSA, Council of Union of South Africa, to form NACTU, National Council of Trade Unions. The intention even there was to ensure that we get an independent federal or federation for trade unions. Although we know that both AZAPO, which is a formation of the Black consciousness movement, and KUSA were aligned to the Black consciousness philosophy. Now that's the kind of history that we are coming from. For one or other reason, NACTU didn't become a strong federation as we had anticipated. And as we know, because of other sponsorships and other material conditions that prevail at that point in time, COSATU became a federation that had more members. Now, what needs to happen now is the realization that the attainment of our national liberation movement has not been achieved. So the objective hasn't changed because we haven't arrived as yet. In as much as there are people who believe that 1994 delivered on what we have sacrificed, we have fought for, and other comrades have died for. 1994 has really not delivered. So the struggle must continue from all fronts, including the trade unions. Now, in terms of the topic, it says the role of the trade unions in the current political situation. Before we really can home in, because the conditions today have actually changed quite significantly, because the workers of today are no longer having the same characteristics of the workers of yesterday. The workplace has completely changed. The political setup has completely changed. Now, what we need to do is to reorganize ourselves in such a manner that whatever else we are doing talk to the current material conditions on the ground. Now, before I can really come back on the issue of the role of trade unions, I just want us to look at the current political situation in occupied Azania, because that is what must inform us in terms of what role must the trade union play at this point in time. Again, it's not my intention to give a long list of the current political problems that we're facing in the country. But all of us, we are aware at this point in time that we are operating under a very weak and vulnerable economy. And it was indeed by design. We knew that by allowing 1994 to happen, which, by the way, AZAPO boycotted it, because we sort of, in terms of our analysis, understood that the negotiations that took place prior to 1994 were not going to deliver on what we believed was the best solution for the country. That's what we are having now. We're having a very weak economy. And what we need to do is to find ways and means to inject some new life into our economy so that it can benefit all of us. The second other issue that we are faced with currently is poverty and inequality. And if you look at the masses that are poor in their own country, we are one of the countries in the world that the owners of the land are poor. The settlers are the ones who have got the wealth of the country. And that's the current situation at this point in time. We look at the education system. Our education system, it's not helping the economy. I'm not an educationist. I'm not an economist. But I do strongly believe that unless and until we revamp the entire education system, our economy is going to remain, or it's going to get worse. So we need to do something about our education system. And obviously, because what we are having in terms of the weak economy, the education system that is producing employees, we are having a high rate of unemployment in the country. And that's the situation that we are faced with today. And it's a challenge to us as political activists and trade union activists as well, because one reason why trade unions are existing is to ensure that we help in creating more help for more wealth for our economy, because we as trade unions, we stand to fight for the rights of the workers. But once we no longer have workers, obviously we are going to stop to exist, because now everybody else would be unemployed. My damn thing is gone again. What happened?
No, continue, comrade, we can hear you.
Oh, you can hear me, I can continue. Okay, thank you very much. So I was just making the point that if as trade unions we are not contributing towards the development of the economy of the country, very soon we are going to cease to exist, because we will no longer be having anybody to represent. The other worrying factor in the current political situation is the crime rate. I think on Friday, the Minister of Police Services gave statistics in terms of the crime rate in the country. What is really concerning is the fact that we are under COVID-19 lockdown, and one would have presumed that in the third quarter of 2021 financial year, which was reported on Friday, the crime rate would be decreasing, but we still see an increase in some of the areas where crime is being committed unabated. And that's very worrying for us as a country. And I think that as well is something that as trade unions, we really need to look into. Corruption, it's rampant. The New Dawn has promised us that they will do something about corruption, but we see no end in corruption at this point in time. And that is a concern for every citizen of Azania, that we should continue with crime unabated, even in circumstances where we are under lockdown. And the people who are leading us taking advantage of COVID-19 to continue with corruption. The political leadership in the country is something that I just want to highlight. That is not a servant type of leadership. I mean, if we had a very good leadership, I think they would have drove the economy in the right direction so that it can address the inequalities and the poverty in our country. The leadership should deal with the issue of decolonizing our education system so that we can start in our schools learning about the things that matters most to the African child. I think the Secretary for Political Education he's involved in the History Month presentations. And when you look at what Black people are capable of doing, one sits back and wonder, why can't we all come out into the limelight and make sure that our contribution academically and otherwise are geared towards making this country all that we want it to be, a socialist Republic of Tanzania. Comrade Hashe, those are just the few things that I wanted to pick up just to indicate the situation that we as trade union activists are faced with at this point in time. Because if we don't deal with the question of education, if we don't deal with the question of economy, we are running a risk of really driving this country. We currently, what is the correct term that we use here, you the economist? Because we just came out of recession, because there was one quarter where we are told the production went up. But for me, I think that's very academic because we don't see any changes that is happening. We have been downgraded, and all these are the result of the leadership that we are having. That leadership in the political sphere, and that leadership within the trade union sector as well, because one of the dangers that we cautioned was for a federation that will go to bed with a ruling party, because now you sort of indoctrinating the workers to follow a particular path without allowing the workers to exercise their own rights in terms of how they associate themselves within and outside the trade unionism. Now, this is a matter that is confronting us at this point in time, that political parties, political activists, as well as trade unions, we need to grapple with it on a daily basis so that we can get ourselves out of this quagmire. I'm not for a moment proposing that it's going to be an easy road that we need to follow to ensure that we bring back, we align our activities, we align our thinking, we align our resources in one direction that will ensure that we save this country from the brink of collapse. Let me pause here, and then if there are any questions, because I see a hand was raised earlier on, just to pick up any questions that might be coming through, but then we will come back and look at the roles that need to be played by trade unions, including federations, in terms of addressing the current political situation in the country. I'm still not on video, but I'm glad that could be heard. I don't know what happened to the video. It's just not my day with this new technology.
Yeah, Comrade Nkokeng, we can hear you and we can see you. So,
oh, good.
Yeah, so there's...
I can see you, but it's fine if you can see me.
From where we are, yeah, we see and hear you, and
Oh,
yeah,
no, thank you very much.
It's been one of those days, and you know, when it happens, it really happens.
Yeah.
You know, thanks for your opening input there with regard to your views on the role of trade unions. And if I were to take back a little bit, you know, there was a time in this country where, you know, just about every person, you know, working and non-working people were very clear on what, you know, trade unions were all about, you know, more especially prior to, you know, the democratic dispensation, you know, prior to 1994. We were very clear on the, you know, the role and the clarity that was given by trade union organizers on why people should join trade unions. And it was largely centering around, you know, the rights of workers at the workplace, you know, the importance of building a critical mass for, you know, the working class and, you know, for the labor movement to strengthen itself so that it can have a stronger voice, you know, when it confronts capital. And in the conversations between labor and capital, you know, the strength and the density of the working class was very important in those engagements. It was also about, you know, providing that representative role with regard to the voice and identity of labor at the workplace. It was really focusing on, you know, minimizing what I would call unemployment and ensuring that, you know, through the engagements that, you know, leaders of labor were having with capital, that whatever policies that are put in place, whatever engagements, you know, they were about creating enough, you know, employment opportunities for workers so that, you know, even those who are unemployed are employed and those who are employed remain employed. So those are some of the things that, you know, were very clear focus for, you know, for labor in their engagements, and which is why, you know, there was, you know, this solidarity that was very key and critical for labor in their engagements, you know, in the workplace and outside of the workplace. And now come 1994, and besides all of that, there was also a very clear agenda of, you know, engaging in a struggle, you know, beyond the workplace, of ensuring that we march, you know, the revolutionary development in the country towards a worker-controlled, you know, socialist setup in the country. And I suppose most of the workers across the world have, you know, for a number of years been very clear on you know, the need for their struggle to, you know, be propelled towards, you know, socialism. And that has been, you know, the main characteristic of their agenda as they were marching forth. And come to, you know, where we are right now. Do you still see that agenda as the agenda that the trade union movement is pursuing in the present circumstances? You know, taking account of all of the issues that you have alluded to with regard to, you know, the changing circumstances in the economic setup of the country, the higher unemployment rates, and, you know, the COVID-19 situation in the present circumstances. Where are we with regard to the agenda that labor was pursuing prior to 1994 versus to where we are now?
Yeah, Comrade Hashi, thank you very much for also painting that picture for us. Let me respond by saying we haven't arrived. The things that we said prior to 1994, they are still on the agenda. I think what has changed are the material conditions on the ground in terms of the workers. Like I said in my opening remarks, that we are no longer, well, in fact, technology has advanced to a stage where we do not have a worker who we saw in 1970, in 1980. We're now having technology that has brought in revolution into the entire labor market. Now, COVID-19 has actually exposed us on one side, our unpreparedness, exposed us in terms of our economy. But on the flip side, it has also sort of catalyzed or crystallized the fact that we can work from home today. Now, the question that arises is the organizer of a trade union who would go to the workplace to organize workers, to join the trade union, to conscientize them, to educate them. Those facilities are gradually being taken away. They are no longer there. Most people are working from home, and that has been intensified. That possibility of working from away from a workplace has been intensified during the COVID-19. Prior to that, I'm an HR practitioner. We've been talking about working from home, flexi hours, and those kind of things. But I think the pace was slow in terms of moving into that direction. But with COVID-19, that pace has been accelerated to a point where most people now, I don't have the real figures, but I could say more than 70% of the labor force can work from home. Now, the role of the trade union in terms of the liberation struggle, because we haven't achieved the aims and objectives of our liberation struggle, in terms of conscientizing, in terms of educating, to ensure that we attain a socialist setup in the country. They need to continue to organize workers, but they need to organize workers in a different way because things have changed. How can we leverage on the economy, on the technology to advance the aims and objectives of the trade unions? We need to think differently so that we can address the issues that are confronting us. Because unless organized labor confront the issue about the economy, and we cannot talk about the economy without talking about the land. And that's where we lost it all in 1994, because you and I know that the struggle for Black consciousness, the struggle for AZAPO all along was fundamentally about repossession of the land. And even as we're talking today, we don't have the land. Now, we need to confront this issue from all angles, from all spheres. And that remains a paramount role that trade unions must play in making sure that we create an economy that will benefit all of us. We create an economy that will eradicate. I hear people talking about reduction, or are they using the word reducing poverty? We must eradicate poverty. We can't have people who are Aborigines being poor in their own country. It's unheard of. But we lack that political will of being unpopular in some of the decisions that we are taking. But it's not surprising, because we know that there are other people who have been bought. They got fed checks so that they can derail and the struggle. Now, just an underlying point for me is that the role of the trade unions as we envisage it prior to 1994 has not changed. What has changed could be the way in which it must be done, taking into cognizance the technological changes that are on the ground.
Mm. No, thanks for your views there, and just check with our audience here if I saw hands earlier. I see they've since disappeared. But you know what I want to talk about, or want us to talk about, Conrad, is you know, the depleting or the seeming depleting density of the union, in terms of its base, the solid base that it used to have. You know, in the past, in the 80s, 90s, when there was an issue that required attention of labor, you know, it was easy and clearly visible to see the strength of labor with regards to, you know, those demands, whether we're demanding for the recognition of May Day and any other related matters that impacted on the labor movement. And I'm actually wondering whether, you know, the labor movement still has a solid base through which we feel that, you know, the working class can be represented, and whether, you know, the leaders of the labor movement still believe that they have capacity to mobilize, you know, mobilize within the workplace and mobilize society in favor of the interests of the working class. I'm talking about, you know, the present circumstances in the country. Do we feel that, you know, the political situation in the country has arisen to a point where, you know, labor leadership feels kind of immobilized to be able to build a stronger, you know, trade unions to represent the interests of workers? Because, you know, if you look at what is happening now, the labor movement seems to be very muted in all things happening in the country. We don't hear the voice of the working class on, you know, COVID. You know, we have been dealing with COVID for over a year now, or it's almost, you know, since the beginning of last year. And we haven't had labor standing up for, you know, the working class who are at the coalface of, you know, attending to issues impacted upon by COVID, you know, the unemployment issues, you know, the threat to the health workers. And we haven't had much with regard to, you know, the response of labor to, you know, all those kind of things, and the economic climate in the country. And we don't hear what is the thinking of labor with regards to all of these things.
Comrade Hashi, you are quite right that we as trade union activists, we have muted ourselves. It's a question of we have made a choice to keep quiet. We are no longer robustly, rigorously defending the rights of the workers on continuous basis. And the reason for that, I think, in my view, has been the mentality that Uhuru has arrived. And we sort of reached a point of complacency that all is well and there is nothing that needs to be done because now we can drink tea with the white bosses. We can attend parties with the white bosses as leaders of trade unions. We can be members of parliament as trade unions. Then we've forgotten about the very people that we are representing. Because if we go down to the ordinary worker today, he's still being subjected by similar conditions that were there prior to 1994. If there is anything better, it's a service which is unreliable. The worker will get a service for 2 days, and for the next 5 days, that service is not available. And those are the conditions under which the workers are coming from. Because again, before they become a worker, they are a member of a community. So we need to fight this from all angles to ensure that when we fight for the rights of the workers, they extend even beyond the workplace. Gone are the days where probably some of us will relate to this very easily. When you arrive at work, they say you must leave your problems at the gate, and then you will pick them up when you go back home, because the employers didn't look after the welfare of the employees. But the responsibility is there of the trade unions to play that role, but we're not playing it, mainly because we are now, should I say, fat cats? Because one of the roles of the trade unions, you see, we've got three major players, let me put it that way, three major players in the labor market. You have the owners of the production, which currently in Azania, we still find that the owners of the production are white people. You have the government, and you have the trade union. That's a tripartite that is working within the labor movement. The owners of production are there to provide the means for production. Government is there to facilitate creation of wealth. Because the other thing that we're having a problem with in our country is that the government wants to see itself as a provider of employment opportunities. That's why we found a bloated government service, because there is a mentality that government is a provider of employment opportunities. And the third party being the trade union, an independent federation that will be able to play a meaningful role in the creation of wealth, in dealing with the workers' rights, to ensure that our workers are treated decently. And again, our workers advance to be the owners of the production as well. But what we see currently, we are perpetual drawers of water and hewers of wood in our own country. That's very disturbing. And to answer your question in one line, is that we're not playing that role as trade unions. We're not playing that role. We are playing elsewhere for our.
Can I just check something, Comrade, in terms of the developments that we have seen in the last couple of years. There was a time when, if you look at COSATU, for instance, it was largely driven by the blue-collar worker, and the voice of the blue-collar worker was, I think, predominant in COSATU. And that voice is no longer there. And I think SAFTU has taken a leading role in terms of representing the blue-collar worker. And COSATU is largely a white-collar worker now. I mean, if you check the structural configuration of that federation, by the National Union of Mine Workers, there are very few very strong blue-collar worker unions within COSATU. Is that not the reason why we see a muted voice coming from COSATU as representatives of labor? And secondly, the sunset clause, we don't know when the sunrise is going to arrive. It's been sunset and the new dawn, and the sun is not rising towards a struggle for which a lot of workers committed their lives in the revolutionary struggle. Because as you and I know, I mean, the working class in this country in particular have not only been engaged in struggle just for the rights to be represented in the negotiation, the bargaining forum. It was a struggle for a higher purpose, and that purpose, is still far from, from being achieved. And earlier you had also mentioned the issue of government's intent of being the provider of employment opportunities, and something that is an impossible ask, so to speak, because government doesn't necessarily create employment. All it does, it enables opportunities for employment to be created by making sure that the policies are labor friendly, and it is largely the private sector that creates those opportunities once they see the policies of the country being free or being amenable to them to create business opportunities in that environment. And our country is not even interested in creating more opportunities by way of introducing more state-owned companies where the large majority of our people can be absorbed. So the essence of it is that I see a very muted labor movement going forward. What do you see, with all of these changing circumstances?
Comrade Hashi, I think your analysis is spot on. I agree with you 100%. Like I said in my opening remark, that the struggle for the national liberation must continue in all fronts. The immobilization of the trade unions, it's something that has happened by design, in my view. The enemies have realized that we need to infiltrate this sector. We need to infiltrate and find a way in which we can co-opt them into political power, co-opt them into some kind of euphoria or some kind of disengagement in such a manner that they will no longer be pursuing the rights for the workers and to fight for the development of the economy in our country. So I agree with you that we are muted, but that process has been designed. It didn't just happen. Those that would want to keep the wealth of the country in their hands have the monopoly of wealth. So it fit to get into that sector and ensure that they cause some disruption.
And what should we do to reactivate the voice of the working class? What should be done?
That was the next point. Thank you very much. That was the next point that I was going to raise. To say we are muted, we are immobilized. Are we going to accept the situation as is? The answer is overwhelmingly no. We can't allow the current situation to continue without being challenged. Now, what needs to be done is to continue, in fact, to accelerate the conscientization process. It's not easy, it's difficult, but we need to realign our thinking, we need to realign our resources so that we talk every day, right from our homes, our families. Unfortunately, I can't see who is on, but I've invited quite a number of my nephews, my nieces, and what have you, just for them to get involved in politics, involved in economics of our own country, because it is the youth of today that must really take the baton and move forward. But they can't do that alone. They need us for guidance. They need us to sharpen whatever tools of analysis they are having so that they can have a clear understanding of where originally the Black consciousness movement wanted to take this country to. Because I think that's the only way in which we can guarantee the rights of workers, which we can guarantee the rights of the citizens of our country, to safeguard them, to make sure that the wealth is equitably distributed to all of us. You've given an example of the state-owned enterprises. I mean, what have we done as a new government ever since 1994 in terms of advancing that legacy of apartheid? Probably I'm using a politically incorrect term here, but the Afrikaners, they were deliberate in everything else that they were doing. When they created those state-owned enterprises, they made sure that if I was a father, I'm working at Eskom, my son will also go and work at Eskom. And not necessarily because it's nepotism, but because he would have made sure that he shaped the development and the training of my child so that he can fit into a specific position in that state-owned enterprise. We haven't created one. That's why our economy is not growing. Our trade unions are immobilized. We're not saying anything, including myself, we're not saying anything unequivocally about that. And we are regressing actually as a country. So we need to go back to our drawing board and say, guys, where are we heading to? The new dawn, like you said earlier on, indeed, we know about the sunset clause. We need to see the sun rising now. It's too long that we've been waiting. And we've been promised a new dawn, a new dawn. We
Yeah.
can't, we see, okay.
No, I was just checking, comrade. You know, you're saying we need to go back to the drawing board, and I don't know what should be drawn on that board. You know, there are a couple of things that you know have been observable. You know, more especially in this country, you know, post 1994. You know, through the introduction of you know, liberal economic policies, you know, the disintegration of you know, the large workplaces, you know, it's on the rise. I mean, we see it you know, with Eskom right now. You know, they have been talking about disintegrating it, and I think that is happening. And if you look at you know, the state-owned enterprises, there hasn't been a single state-owned enterprise that's been introduced since 1994. And yeah, and in fact, what we have been seeing is a closure of some, and that have been existing have seen trouble, you know, throughout. We have been talking about I don't know, money outflows out of SAA, Eskom, Transnet, and all the major, you know, state-owned enterprises. And these outflows are not going to investment; they are going to, you know, lined pockets of corrupt leaders, be it labor or political leaders. So, you know, there's just this disintegration of you know, these workplaces, and we also see what I call a differentiation of, you know, skills of, you know, at the workplace, such that we see the rise of the white collar worker. That's why I was introducing the issue about, you know, the emergence of SAFTU as a federation in the country, and whether it was not something to, you know, to be celebrated by an organization like AZAPO, that here you see a trade union federation that emerges and largely representing the blue collar workers. And would it not have been an opportune, you know, time for AZAPO to engage with SAFTU and see how, you know, it can build relations with such a labor federation, so that it can influence the thinking and the voice of workers represented therein, you know, towards you know, what a labor movement should be representing. And you know, I was talking about the skills differentiation at the workplace, you know, such that you see the rise of individualism, what I would call individualism, and people of you know, a white collar base, not caring much about labor representation, and you know, interesting themselves with being able to represent themselves, and largely because they work for you know, consultants, sub-consultants, and they work for, because I mean, if you look at government right now, most of the work that used to be done by, you know, by workers who were employed directly by the state is outsourced to a number of small organizations that you know, employ you know, those people through agencies, and the impact of these agencies on, you know, the voice of the working class. Because now you know, you know, what I was talking about earlier, the density that enabled, you know, capacity and voice of the workers is diminishing. So what, you know, and all of this then brings to rise significant wage disparities between the working class, because it is now not as easy as it used to be to negotiate for a large mass of workers for equitable, you know, wages of all of these workers. Now you have small groupings that have, you know, that are established, you know, and these policies that are there that have significant implications on the lives of the working class and the unions that represent them, and factor in the fact that most of these trade unions have got investment arms that are, you know, collaborating and in cahoots with, you know, leaders of capital to a point where it becomes difficult for, you know, the workers or the working class leadership to challenge, the status quo, because in so doing, they will be challenging themselves, because some of them are, straddled and representing both sides with regards to all of these things. So what do we do with all of these implications that we see, and what should be the strategies of, of labor leadership with regard to all of these things going forward? Because it's one thing to say, let's go to the drawing board, and it's another to say, this is what I think should be drawn on this board to enable, the leadership of labor to reactivate the muted voice of, the working class towards a sustained campaign that favors the interests of the working class.
Yeah, Comrade Hash, you're quite right. What is it that we need to draw from the drawing board in order to address the current situation? We need to be to bring back the spirit of solidarity. We are currently departmentalized, as you have correctly said, in terms of the trade unions, such that we are in competition with one another instead of rallying around one another to address a common problem that is facing the workers, and at the end of the day, that is facing the country. So in the good olden days, we pledged solidarity on a number of issues. You've given an example of SAFTU. They do organize some demonstrations. Those are the kind of things that we need to start doing, because we used to do them in the past, and pledge solidarity, not by word, but pledge solidarity by joining forces to put pressure where necessary on a specific institution so that it can bring about the change that we desire. You are quite right again that the formation of SAFTU has been an opportunity for us to advance and join forces with them. But it's not that we're not doing anything and we haven't done anything. We have been working on certain activities closely with SAFTU. We have given them the necessary support when it was required. But I don't think that we're doing it enough because it must be continuous. We need to move to a point where we are seen openly to be working with them. I can remember one or two occasions where we actually joined SAFTU in one of the demonstrations. So pledging solidarity to make sure that we work together to put pressure on whoever in terms of making a change is something that we need to do and not just say. The activism, it's something that we can bring about from the drawing board. In good olden days, we would identify an issue, and again, we'll rally around one another in form of demonstrations, in a form of picketing, you name them, to demonstrate against what we didn't want. Those are some of the things that we can do to ensure that we put pressure to bring bring about the changes that we want in the labor market. The one challenge that I alluded to earlier on was that the workplaces also changed. So we need to have a new thinking of how we're going to use technology today to the advantage of Black workers in terms of advancing the struggle for liberation.
No, thanks, my comrade. I can't believe that time has flown this much. So I think it's about, we are at that time where we should be closing now. It's a pity that, we had a delayed start due to technical challenges, but here we are. And can we get your closing remarks before we off?
Yeah, thanks once more. I'll just be very short in terms of my closing remarks, Comrade Hashi. We have a big challenge facing us currently in occupied Tanzania. And if we don't stand up, we are going to lose the whole country. Because what's happening today, I don't see a political will to stop it. So the call for the youth, the call for the Black consciousness activists and adherents is that we need to stand up, and it must be now. We must stop being armchair critics. We must go back into the trenches and fold our arms and fight for this country. It is not too late. I think when I walk around, engage few individuals here and there, I can feel that people are, must I use that word in quotes, hurtful about what's happening in the country. And again, we need to come together in that spirit of solidarity of yesteryear and deal with the issues on the ground that is facing our beloved Tanzania.
Thank you, Comrade Nkokeng Morufane, the National Secretary for Labour at AZAPO. It's been great having you on this platform and spending your afternoon with us. And it's always good to connect with our audience. And I hope you enjoyed the discussion. Let's reconnect again next week, same place, same time. It's always great to have you here. That's where we start. And yeah, have a good afternoon further, and goodbye.
Thanks very much, Comrade Hash, for the opportunity.
Cool.
Thanks.